Our speaker today is Ryan Schiller, a native of New Jersey, having grown up in the Pine Barrens area, which is very similar to the sandhills we have here in North Carolina. He became fascinated and captivated, he says, with the unique native plants in his home area there near the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. And by middle school, which would make him 5th, 6th grade or something like that, or 8th, he was hybridizing sundews or Asarum. And this interest grew into a much larger effort, and he began to grow a garden, and actually grew a garden until he left home and went to college. And he currently is a junior majoring in horticulture at Clemson University in South Carolina. Now, this past summer, Ryan worked as an intern with Tom Ranney at the NC State's Mountain Research Station near Asheville, where he was exposed to a variety of things that they do at the Mountain Research Station, including pollen collection, genetic ploidy manipulation, if anyone knows what that is, collecting germplasm from both native and cultivated plants. And if you follow Ryan on social media, you know he spends a lot of his free time looking for rare and new plants, native plants particularly, around the Southeast. And if you follow him on Facebook, you'll really get an education in itself by just reading what he posts each weekend. He is here today to tell us about a unique geological area in western North Carolina and western South Carolina that's called the Blue Ridge Escarpment. It's an area that gets about twice as much rainfall as we do here in the Triangle area. As a result of this rainfall and the geology of the area, there's a unique flora in that area. So Ryan is here today to talk about the hidden floral gems of the Blue Ridge Escarpment. Please welcome Ryan Schiller.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bobby. So let's get into it. So, hidden gems of the Southern Blue Ridge Escarpment. So what is it? So as you can see on the map, it is sort of this small area. It is just north of Greenville, and you can see that's western North Carolina. And it's just this really, really steep rise in the geography. And because of this steep rise, it just, all the rainfall and the moisture from the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, it just kind of converges in this one area. And there's a lot of orographic lift. So another big thing of why this area is so unique is, usually the Appalachians, they run north to south. Here, as you can see on the map, they switch from north to south to east to west. So that just keeps funneling more and more of that rainfall into that area. And so what do these factors mean for diversity? Well, the vascular plant diversity is extremely high in the area. In Pickens and Oconee County in South Carolina, we have 68 species of ferns, which that pteridophyte diversity, that rivals just about any area in the United States for the highest. And a really cool plant from the area, Hymenophyllum tunbridgense, that is typically a tropical and South American fern, but because of this unique geology and unique geography and unique climate, it actually grows in a single gorge in South Carolina. So to have something that is normally from a tropical frost-free climate growing in South Carolina in the Southern Blue Ridge Escarpment, that's really kind of, you can see why it's a special place. And so I'll start getting into some of the communities, but this is a common community in the Southern Blue Ridge Escarpment, the granitic outcrops, and these outcrops can manifest themselves in different ways. You have more acidic outcrops, you have cataract fens, which I'll get into later, which is water running down these outcrops, but you also have these classic dry outcrops, and what you get on these outcrops are these little mats of soil that form throughout ages and ages, and they usually start out as, a little speck of dirt, and as the years go by, more and more just piles on, plants start to colonize, and you eventually get yourself some really, really lovely mats. And also, these granitic outcrops they can also be found in on mountains that are also known as monadnocks. And a monadnock it's typically a granite formation, and all the land around it has eroded except this large formation of granite. And that one right there, that is Glassy Mountain in Pickens County. That's a wonderful, wonderful site. So we'll get into some of the plants that you'll find there. That is Tradescantia hirsuticaulis. I don't know many people that are growing this one, but it comes in all different colors. It's a wonderful, wonderful plant. You just see it growing in those outcrop mats. And this is a nice little purple-pink form, and that is a nice blue form. I mean, it's just a lovely plant. A lot of Tradescantias don't behave themselves in the garden, but so far this one has behaved itself pretty well, which is really, really good. So I would definitely recommend keeping an eye out for that one. And this is an interesting plant. So this is Pachyra obovata. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the plant. You've grown it before. But on Glassy Mountain in Pickens County, there is a extremely tomentose or pubescent form of this Pachyra obovata. And the taxonomy of this, it gets waffled back and forth. No one really knows what to call it. But I think might have figured this one out. There's an old segregate of it called variety Eliadii, and that seems to be an extremely pubescent form of it. Occurs in Kentucky all the way down to Florida. And looking at some old herbarium vouchers, that seems to be what that is. So will that get named eventually? Who knows? And Aesculus sylvatica. So if any of you know Aesculus sylvatica, you're probably familiar with a creamy yellow flower, but in the upstate of South Carolina, we have a crazy little phenomenon where Aesculus pavia, which grows, generally south of the Sandhills region, so around Columbia, you'll start to see it become quite common. The hummingbirds, as they migrate north, they have a little bit of pollen from the Aesculus pavia stuck onto them. And as they pollinate the Aesculus sylvatica as they go north into South Carolina, they've actually gotten some of those color pigments into the Aesculus sylvatica. So here's what we end up with, a whole array of colors of Aesculus sylvatica. I mean, there's just some lovely colors. There's light, creamy reds. There's dark reds. There's more on the yellow spectrum. It's just a wonderful garden plant. Some of them have a really nice light fragrance. They're just a low, lovely shrub. And they can take sun, shade, whatever you throw at them. Wonderful plant. And this is a really, really interesting plant. So this is Pachyra x mamingeri. And Pachyra x mamingeri is a hybrid between Pachyra millefolium, which is the foliage on that is super dissected. It's a really, really wonderful plant. And it crossed with Pachyra anonyma, which some of you may be familiar with Pachyra anonyma. It's one of the more weedy species, and the two hybridize, and you get this lovely little plant that occurs on the monadnocks. And this is a great one, Lonicera flava. So Lonicera flava, you'll find this on outcrops that are more on the Mafic side of things, so more basic soil, has more magnesium, more calcium, and gosh, it's a wonderful plant. I mean, look at that. It's just, you see it in all different colors too. Some are more deep orange to almost red, and some are more yellow orangey like this one. And this is a really interesting plant. So, Bryodesma, which formerly was Selaginella, these are some of the early colonizers of those soil mats. So these are kind of sometimes what begin those soil mats, and they just form these green clouds on the outcrops, and it's just such a unique plant. There's a little combo of Tradescantia hirsuticaulis and Myriopteris lanosa. And this is an interesting one as well, Hypericum gentianoides. So this plant, if you take a bunch of it and rub it up in your fingers, it smells like orange juice. And it's not the craziest plant ornamentally, but I mean, it does have some textural appeal, I'd say. But I mean, the cool thing about this one is it smells like orange juice. Just had to throw that in there. And this is Myriopteris tomentosa. So Myriopteris, I'm a big Myriopteris nut. I have loved them for years and years and years. And generally, they were placed into the genus Calanthes. Our East Coast ones have now been changed to Myriopteris, so This one is the woolly lip fern, and there it is on a little sandstone outcrop, and that's just a lovely plant. And that is Myriopteris lanosa. So that's a great example of those little shallow soil pockets, and you'll find stuff like Myriopteris lanosa in those. And here's a dwarf form. It's around this tall, and you thought that one was small. Even smaller. That's, I don't know, maybe half inch to an inch. So you can find some really, really crazy varying forms of Myriopteris out in the wild. And this is a great plant. So some of you may know this one. Formerly the genus was Mononuria. It has been changed to Geocarpon. And gosh, this thing just lights up the outcrops in the spring. So you'll see this plant from March to May, and then once the heat and the rain kind of slow down, there's absolutely nothing. So now if you go to the outcrops, it's just brown seeds. So a lot of the outcrop plants, they kind of have an ephemeral nature to them. They take advantage of the moisture while it's available in the spring, and they kind of go dormant throughout the summer. So if you go to the outcrop now, all the Myriopteris and everything, they'll be shriveled up and you think there was nothing there. But if you go in the spring, there's some wonderful stuff. And that's an outcrop in the spring. You can see some Phacelia, there's Myriopteris, there's that Geocarpon, and it's just a wonderful array of colors. And this is a neat one as well. Diamorpha smallii, which formerly was Sedum smallii. This is a plant characteristic of a lot of the flat rock communities you'll see out, if you've been to 40 Acre Rock down in South Carolina. I think you guys have quite a bit of it up here in North Carolina as well. But they grow in these little vernal pools on the outcrops. So these pools are generally filled with water for, generally from November till March and April. And after that water kind of dries out, the sedum come up and they flower and they go through a whole life cycle. And throughout the summer, they're just about dormant. So they're capitalizing on the not extremely hot and horrendous months of the summer on the outcrops, and they're taking advantage of the moisture while they can. And that's just a lovely thing to see. You don't see anything really like that. That's just a pure red that just shoots out at you. And this is another plant that's characteristic of more flat rock communities, Pachyra dubia. So this formerly was Pachyra tomentosa, I believe. It's been changed to Pachyra dubia now. But, gosh, it's just a wonderful, the foliage, really, really nice, just upright, strict foliage and flowers around early April. Wonderful, wonderful plant. And this is a great one as well, Sericocarpus linifolius. So this is Asteraceae. Is anyone growing Sericocarpus of any sort? We have a few species in the southeast, and they all make great crevice garden plants. I think Tony has a few down at Juniper level. But this one, the foliage, it almost looks like Pycnanthemum tenuifolium. It's just a wonderful plant, blooms around Memorial Day to early June, and it takes the toughest conditions. It's grown in an inch of soil on these granitic outcrops, and that was, we've been in a drought for 3 months, and it still was looking flawless after that drought, and absolutely wonderful plant. Ambrosia portiaei. So this was a recently described ragweed. So, ragweed, it's not an ornamental plant by any means, but I did think this was worthy of being put in here because, usually you'll see Ambrosia artemisifolia, but this one, if you rub it, it smells like jasmine, which is really interesting to think, oh, such an ugly plant has such a really nice scent. So that's that. And this is a wacky yucca. So the yucca on the outcrops in South Carolina, they tend to be more of a spectrum than a specific species. That's the best way to describe it, because you get Yucca flaccida, which is the weak leaf yucca, but you also get some filamentosa types, which are the filamentosa types really natural there, or were they just brought up by the Cherokees to be used for soap? We don't know. So anyways, this one is just, look at it. The foliage on that it's just spectacular. I've never seen a yucca like this, and it's just this big burly plant. Usually you see filamentosa and the foliage is really thin and kind of scraggly, but gosh, that's just wonderful. And this is an outcrop in Georgia. So these granitic outcrops they extend all the way down to the coast in some cases. But this is a wonderful one with Liatris microcephala, which I'm sure some of you have grown. It actually occurs on some of the outcrops in Georgia. And this was a recent find, Opuntia drummondii, which has anyone grown that? Oh, well, we got one. Usually this is a plant more characteristic of dunes down by the coast, and it extends itself into the Piedmont, into central Georgia, but no one has documented it in northern Georgia, and this is way northern Georgia, Stevens County, if anyone knows where that is. So me and Ren Oliver, we had documented this back from a granitic outcrop for the first time in northern Georgia, and it tends to be pretty uncharacteristic of the stuff you see on the coastal plain. So is it a new species? Maybe, who knows? And oh gosh, it's just another lovely, this is one of my favorite outcrops in the upstate of South Carolina. I mean, just hordes and hordes of Myriopteris and all sorts of wonderful gems in those soil pockets. And this is a great plant, Krigia montana. So this plant occurs, it appears there might be two different taxa in this species. So you have one, like in this picture, it occurs on rocks in river scour habitats. So it's growing on these moist rocks, flowing water, and so that. And then you also have a form that occurs on dry outcrops in those dry soil pockets grown with your Myriopteris. And the ones on the outcrops, they tend to have a little bit of glandular hairs right by the flower. And these ones here, they don't have glandular hairs. So are they two different species? That's to be determined. But they are an absolutely wonderful plant in the garden. They bloom all season long. I mean, just a nice little cespitose clump. I really think that that's going to be a great plant. Recently got some of these to Tony, so hopefully they'll be produced, but it's a great one. And this is one of my new species that I'm working on. So this is a clematis in the Viorna complex, and if you've grown any of the Clematis viorna and you've grown them from different sources, you know they are absolutely all over the place. They occur in every different color and all different forms, all different growth habits. So this one is a new species because it is glandular. Nothing else in that species complex is glandular except one Clematis gatindri, which is out by Nashville. So this is, I have it on 3 outcrops only so far, and there's maybe only 5 or 10 plants in the whole world of it. So it's a very limited distribution so far of this plant. So it's a struggle publishing it because I can't even get pictures of the flowers because the deer want to keep eating it at one site. So it's a struggle with deer no matter what you're doing. If you're gardening, trying to work in taxonomy, it's always a struggle with deer. So this is a great Asteraceae, Eurybia circulosa. So this plant is characteristic of the granitic outcrops, and it just forms a lovely, lovely little mat. It runs a little bit, but it does not run vigorously at all. And usually you see it in purple, but I had found a white form a few weeks ago. So excited how that's going to do. I don't know many people grow this one in the garden, but it sure as hell would make a great garden plant. And there's another picture of that clematis. You can really see how glandular it is on there. I mean, if you touch it, you're pretty sticky from that. So it's definitely a distinct entity. And this is so with the outcrops, you tend to get these shallow soil glade type ecosystems on the edge of the outcrops. So somewhat shaded by the trees, you have more open areas, but you find some really wonderful stuff in these shallow soil glades. This is Melica mutica. Is anyone growing that? No one. So this is a wonderful plant. I mean, it just forms these lovely, lovely little green mats. It stays like this all season. Generally around, I would say like a foot. Not too tall at all. But it just spreads so gracefully in the wind. It's just a wonderful plant, and it's grown in harsh conditions, so it's definitely going to do great in a garden setting. And this is Phlox amina, which is the hairy phlox. Not a widely grown phlox, but it blooms around third week of April for a few weeks into May, and it just forms low little ground cover. Great, great plant. And now we get into the cataract bogs, which is, everyone calls them cataract bogs. They are not bogs at all, they are fens. So the difference between a bog and a fen is a bog is collected water, and a fen comes from groundwater. So technically, because this is coming from groundwater, this would be a cataract fen. And what these cataract fens are, they're generally water just sloping down the granitic outcrops, and sometimes you get these cataract fen islands that form with some really, really special plants, but sometimes you have this, which is, it's just kind of the margin that gets some great sun, it gets good exposure, and you find some great stuff in there. Here is a great picture of, you can see some of those islands there. I mean, it's just a wild, wild concept to imagine. Things like Sarracenia growing on a dry granitic outcrop. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So here's Sarracenia jonesii, which the flowers, they smell a bit like raspberries and cherry coke. It's a really, really interesting plant. And here is a picture of Sarracenia jonesii in one of the cataract fen islands. And it's just stunning, stunning plant. It's extremely limited. I mean, I think it's only in 3-4 counties, North Carolina, South Carolina. South Carolina, I think we only have 5 sites for it, so it's an extremely limited plant, but it only grows in these cataract fens. And there is an extremely, extremely dark form of it. Sometimes in the fall, you'll get some pictures that push up nearly black. So it's one of the best pitcher plants that you can really go see. And here is a great cataract fen in the fall. So these cataract fens have a lot of coastal plain disjunct flora in them. So all the yellow in there is Coreopsis gladiata, which is known from the coastal plain, but it grows in Greenville County and Pickens County, which is extremely disjunct from the coastal plain. I mean, it's just wild how you get stuff from longleaf pine savannas and down on the coastal plain transported up to the mountains. It really is a crazy concept. And things like Eriacolon texense, which, I mean, if anyone, has anyone grown any Eriacolons or Lacnicolons, the bog buttons? So these are wonderful, wonderful plants. They just send up these little white flower spikes. I mean, that's why they're called bog buttons, because they look like buttons from a bog. And they're just, oh gosh. I mean, I can't say enough about them. They just form little mats and wonderful. Drosera brevifolia, and I mean, you can see the distribution on it, strictly coastal plain, except, you know, Pickens County is highlighted on that because it occurs in Pickens County. So you get extremely disjunct things in the cataract fens. And also in the cataract fens, you get some rhododendrons. So this is Rhododendron arborescens, which is a wonderful, wonderful plant. And this is a rhododendron spa. We don't know what to call it. It occurs in one cataract fen, and it's a really low plant, only around that tall. And it blooms around Memorial Day-ish. So we don't know if it's Viscosum varmontanum, which is another low-running rhodi, and we don't know if it's Rhododendron imulans, which is kind of like the coastal plain analog to Rhododendron viscosum varmontanum. So we don't know what to call it as of now. We need to get some more data on that. But there's new species out there, and they're plentiful. Things like Platanthera ciliaris, which is quite common, but you find in the cataract fens. Wonderful plant. And there it is. There's some sebaceous, there's Liatris spicata in there. I mean, the colors throughout the year in the cataract fens, it's just a wonderful spectrum from spring to summer to fall. Watching them progress throughout the season is wonderful. And there it is, another shot. I mean, the Liatris are just absolutely lovely in there. That's around mid-July. And here's another cataract fen. So this is an example of a higher elevation cataract fen. Those were a lot of the lower elevation ones, and in this high elevation one you find things like Troutvateria, Parnassia, all those things that you typically find up in that Blue Ridge Parkway, that seepy type of environment. They're in here. And this is the only site in South Carolina for Sarracenia purpurea variety montana, which some of you may grow that one. And here it is. It's growing in the cataract fen, but water has been able to kind of make its way up this rock. So I can't say I've ever seen Sarracenia growing on a rock like this, but here it is. It's growing on a rock. So here are those bog islands. I mean, it's just steep, slippery, vertical slope. And these islands have formed with all this coastal plain flora, so you can really transport yourself. And that is how those islands start. Things like one single Sarracenia seedling, it just builds and builds throughout the years. It takes a really long time, but eventually you'll get somewhere. And then, so you go from that to that. And this is a really interesting ecosystem as well. So generally the cataract fens are more on the acidic side, but because of the geology upstream, say you have something like amphibolite upstream, which is a really mafic rock, basic rock, it flows downstream, and because of that, you get plants that you typically find in more basic environments growing on an acidic granitic rock. So it's a really complex thing to think about, but this one, there's amphibolite upstream, so you find things that usually like calcium growing downstream from it. So this is Hypericum prolificum, which some of you may have grown this. It's just a wonderful spreading little plant, flowers just about all summer. You find that in this Mafic cataract fen up on Pinnacle Mountain. And this is Anothera tetragona variety fraseri. So a lot of anotheras are weedy things. You don't want them in the garden, whatever you do. But this one is, I'm excited about this one. It's a great plant, just forms a nice little clump. Tends to be a little short-lived, but it's definitely worth it to have in the garden. This is another thing in the Clematis viorna complex. It might be Clematis beadleyi, which is a segregate within the viorna complex. That's another picture of that. Spigelia marilandica, you find that these kind of Mafic cataract fen seeps up there. It's a really, really lovely plant. I'm sure, hopefully everyone has grown this one. I really hope so. Carex biltmoriana, which this is a similar growth habit to that melica. It just kind of spreads and creeps all around, and you only find it in these Mafic cataract fens. It's a really, really restricted endemic plant to the southern Appalachians. But it's got great silvery foliage, wonderful, wonderful plant. And Houstonia serpillifolia, this is the time-leaved bluet. So, you know, you generally find this throughout the southern Appalachians. It's just a wonderful plant, blooms early spring, really, really cute, kind of diminutive. It's easy to skip over, but it's just wonderful. There's a little close-up of the flowers. What was that?
It can bloom most of the growing season. I've seen it
Oh,
bloom
up
through like June.
high elevation?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess with abundant moisture, it probably would bloom a lot longer than just spring. So now into some trilliums. Oh my gosh. Well, there's so many trilliums. I mean, we have one mountain in South Carolina. You can find 7 trilliums within 1 square mile, which that diversity, you don't find that in trilliums anywhere else. So this is something in the cuneatum complex. If you know Trillium cuneatum, they have short stubby petals. They overlap with each other. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't call that cuneatum. I mean, cuneatum from around here, it smells like juicy fruit. That's characteristic what we'd call real cuneatum. But it turns out there are at least 7 to 8 different things within that are lumped under Trillium cuneatum that are their own distinct entities. And this is one of those from, this one is in Clemson. It's just a really interesting plant. It's got a funky little yeasty smell going on with it. Kind of has a little bit of vinegar tints in there too. It's just really interesting. There's a nice little clump of it. I mean, just look how long those petals are. I mean, they almost have that spatulate shape like Trillium maculatum, which doesn't grow too far from here, maybe 30 miles south of Clemson. But it's just really, really odd. And there it is again. And this one is also a really early bloomer. These photos were taken the last week of February, which is really early even for cuneatum types. And there's cuneatum, which most people would think of. This one was photographed in Brevard, North Carolina. Typical has that juicy fruit kind of smell. Petals overlap with each other, shorter plants. There's another cuneatum complex. This one is from Oconee County in South Carolina. And wider petals, fragrance, more yeasty, less vinegary. And here's a yellow cuneatum. Cuneatum comes in every color you can imagine. It comes in yellows, skin browns, tan, deep purple, just about any color you can imagine. So there's wonderful. And so that's a funny picture. Usually you find the best trilliums growing with trash. Here they are with a tire. They look happy as can be. And these ones are grown with tires, kudzu, and old beer bottles. So if you can't grow trilliums in your garden, I guess throw beer bottles and tires at them. They might do something then. This is another wonderful one, Trillium rugelii. So Trillium rugelii is allied to Trillium cernunum, which some of you may know. But wonderful little plant, flowers droop down, later bloomer. It's one of the pedicellate species. And generally around second, third week of April, sometimes first week, this blooms in South Carolina. But wonderful little plant. There's some close-ups. But this, what is this? It's an upright Trillium rugelii. So is this a new species? Well, before Tom Patrick, who was the authority on trilliums, he had said that this was probably new species, but he didn't want to be bothered with it. So here is one of those examples. It's an upright form of it, and the ovaries tend to be all different colors. Some are red, some are white. It's a weird little rugelii in quotation marks. And here's a slope in South Carolina from that mountain that has 7 different species on it. It's just a wonderful slope of trilliums, all sorts of carex and ferns. And here's some trilliums from that site where you have 7 different species. They are, oh gosh, who knows what to call them because they all hybridize with each other. So here's one such example of that. There's another one. This one has some vasii blood in it, maybe with simile. We don't know. There's another one. Looks like an upright vasii hybrid of some sorts. There's another one. There's another one. There's another one. And there's Trillium vasii. So you can see that's definitely not vasii. And you can see my hand on that picture. The blooms are sometimes that big on Trillium vasii. And it's a really, really great garden plant, late bloomer, generally last week of April, mid-April, sometimes even into May. And an interesting thing about these ones are the flowers smell like wet dog. It's not pleasant by any means, but the trilliums, they need to get pollinated, so got to get the flies to them. Best way to do it is smell like wet dog. And that is some sort of weird vasii entity. It looks very similar to vasii, but I don't know if I feel comfortable calling it straight vasii. And vasii can also manifest itself in different ways. There's an upright vasii. There's a whole population of them that all the flowers are upright. So is that a new species or just a form? We don't know. And Trillium catesbii. So Trillium catesbii, a lot of people spell it B-A-E-I, but the proper spelling is catesbii, B-Y-I. And this trillium really has a wide range throughout the southeast, but there should be at least 5 to 6 different species within Trillium catesbii. So you have some that are upright, like this one. You have some where the flowers are all the way up, almost facing straight up. And you have some, the classic, they just hang straight down. So that's an interesting species complex that no one really acknowledges. And, oh, this is a wonderful one. This is a Savannah River endemic Trillium discolor. And, oh gosh, it's just wonderful. Here's a nice little clump of it. They smell like cloves, which is really, if you go to any co-forest in South Carolina where these trilliums are present, you just kind of get hit with this overwhelming clovey scent. It's really interesting. So if you thought that was a lot of them, there's a good bit of them, but there's there's even more of them. This is the mother lode. Oh gosh, walking into this is heavenly. It's just, you teleport yourself to a place you'd never think you'd be. It's just spectacular. second, third week of April. And here's a nice little orchid, Galliaris spectabilis. So I don't know if anyone has grown this plant, but gosh, it's wonderful. I mean, little tiny purple and white blooms, tiny plant, maybe only around that tall, but just wonderful blooming first week of April. And this is a great carex. So I really, really love carex. A lot of people just look at them and say, oh, they're all grasses. Well, they're not, technically not grasses, and they're not all grasses. They're absolutely wonderful. So this is a Southern Blue Ridge endemic one, Carex rad-40i. I mean, just look at that icy blue color. I mean, you know, I really think that this one, it's got better form, better color than Carex laxicomus. What is that one, Blue Bunny, that some people have grown. I really think that this is a superior plant to that. And there it is in flower. It's got great, not too tall. It's maybe around 16, 18 inches. Wonderful flower spikes on that one. And here's another great carex, Carex austrocaroliniana. So the specific epithet of that, it literally means South Carolina, so the South Carolina carex. And this Southern Blue Ridge endemic plant only occurs right in the corner where Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina meet. And it's just a tight cespitose evergreen clump. This thing looks fabulous 365 days of the year, dry, wet, whatever you throw at it, it looks absolutely wonderful. And here it is in bloom in the spring. I really think that there's something to be said about how graceful it is when it is in bloom. And this is a great plant. So this plant tends to be an epiphyte, lithophyte, and if you're not familiar, epiphyte is when a plant is growing on another plant, lithophyte is when a plant is growing on a rock. And Polypodium, we have two species here in the east. We have Polypodium virginianum and Polypodium appalachianum. And there tends to be a lot of mix-up with the two because they readily hybridize, and the hybrid is a sterile triploid. But this one, Polypodium virginianum, just creeps along in the garden. Wonderful, wonderful plant. A lot of people that have grown it have grown the high elevation stuff, which doesn't do well here. But to be successful with it, definitely be aware of where it's from and grow the low elevation stuff. But wonderful plant. And this is a great one. We don't have much of it in South Carolina. This is the narrow-leaved glade fern, so it's pretty common once you go farther north, but it just barely reaches into South Carolina. The Diplasiopsis pycnicarpa, wonderful plant. It just forms nice little clump. I can't say much more about it. You see it there. It's wonderful. Pachysandra procumbens. So we don't have much Pachysandra procumbens in South Carolina in the Southern Blue Ridge Escarpment, but it does occur one site plentiful. It's absolutely wonderful. You go see it any time of year. And an interesting about them, I think the flowers, you know, they generally bloom around late February, early March. I don't know if anyone has smelt the flowers, but I think they kind of smell a little bit like a Christmas store. Has anyone smelled them, the flowers on them? I really think they kind of have a Christmassy scent to them, but wonderful plant. And this is a interesting spot. It's called the Narrows. I mean, you could just see these humid gorges. I mean, these things drop straight down. And at the top of that gorge, I mean, in the winter, you go here, it could be 18 degrees. And then you go down to the bottom of the gorge where that water is rushing through. It's, you know, 40 degrees. So places like these are why things like the Hymenophyllum tunbridgense are able to thrive and support themselves in this climate. And now Asarum. Oh, well, a lot of people call them hexastylus. I'm not one of those people. They're all Asarum. I'm not going to get into why, but they are all Asarum. So I absolutely love these plants. The wild ginger is absolutely wonderful. We have a few different species in the Southern Blue Ridge, but they are such a variable species. I mean, Shuttleworthii and Heterophyllum tend to be the most variable, but oh gosh, you'll see. I mean, there's that one. I mean, that's just, it's wild. That's also Shuttleworthii. So all those are all Shuttleworthii. Are they all the same Shuttleworthii? No, I don't think so. I don't think all Asarum are the same at all. So that's it. And this is Asarum rhombiformis, that's a Southern Blue Ridge Escarpment endemic plant. Only a few counties, Transylvania, Buncombe County, and Pickens County, or no, I don't, no, we don't have it in Pickens County, in Greenville County. So it's a really, really small range on that plant. And the specific epithet of this one should actually be Asarum mingeri. If you go back and look at all the type specimens and trace all the records back for this plant, the real name for it is Asarum mingeri. And somehow got messed up. It's Asarum rhombiformis, but and there it is. It's a really interesting Asarum, really constricted openings on them, really unique. I mean, you get all different colors. You get pinks, and you get these ones that kind of go white toward the top. That's a little lovely pink one. And here's an interesting one. So this is, if you look at that flower, you'd think that's Asarum contractum. But this is actually Asarum rhombiformis, because if you look at the inside of it, it looks like Asarum rhombiformis. So a Asarum contractum looking Asarum rhombiformis, that's what that is. They manifest themselves in all different forms. And this is Asarum heterophyllum. This is one of my favorites. I mean, great foliage. The foliage tends to be highly variegated on this species, and oh, the flowers are even more wonderful. I mean, look at that. That's one with just great, great foliage, almost pure silver. And these flowers, oh gosh, I mean, I've found a form where they're almost pitch black. That's a lovely one. And look at that one. That one's one of the craziest ones I've seen. I mean, look at the spotting and that texture, and that was a really big flower too for that species. And this is one from the northern part of the escarpment, Asarum rosei. This is a Catawba River endemic plant. There's only 2 sites in it for the whole world, and just really, really interesting plant. And this is a great, I'm sure some of you have grown the Collinsonias, but this one, Collinsonia verticillata, it's just a wonderful, wonderful plant. Little short thing, I mean, only 6 to 12 inches tall. Blooms early spring to mid-spring. Wonderful. It's endemic to Southern Blue Ridge, but keep an eye out for that one. And the Cardamones. Oh gosh, I love the Cardamones. They're absolutely wonderful. They tend to show themselves around December, January. They start to come up, and then as the heat of summer comes on, they slow down and they go under for the season. But this is one of the diphylla types, which, if anyone has grown Cardamone diphylla, this does not look like any of the diphylla that you're familiar with. So in the upstate, we have this really, really large, glossy form of it. I think it might be a new species, but we're not too sure yet. And this is Cardamone angustata. Wonderful, wonderful plant, almost silver on that one. And this is probably a hybrid. There's one site in Stevens County, Georgia, where you have 4 to 5 species of Cardamones, and they all hybridize with each other, so it's really a mess figuring out what's what there. But this is a wonderful, I mean, you can see how big the foliage is, as big as my hand on that one. So great, lovely plant. And the violas, Viola pedata subspecies, pedata, wonderful, wonderful rock garden plant. I mean, sometimes they're only around that tall. These were some lovely little dwarf ones, and they come in all different flower colors. You can find pinks, dark purples, blues. This one is a white lavendery one. Just a great, great plant. And Phlox nivalis subspecies hensii. So a lot of people have grown Phlox nivalis, but not many people have grown subspecies hensii, which I think is somewhat of a better plant than a lot of the other Phlox nivalis selections. Wonderful plant, early spring bloomer around March, later March, so it's pretty early for phlox. And this is Iris verna, variety Smalleyana. So Iris verna, which some of you are probably familiar with, there's variety Smalleyana and variety verna. Variety verna tends to be more of a coastal plain thing. The foliage is not as glossy as in the ones that you typically find in the Piedmont, but absolutely wonderful plant. This one as well comes in all different colors, deep blues, whites sometimes. Great plant. The foliage is wonderful. And this one is an absolute mouthful to say. Tetragonotheca helianthioides. That is a weird Asteraceae plant, and you tend to find this in a really interesting community. It occurs with Echinacea laevigata, Convolvulus sericatus, and a few other plants that you typically find in more glade ecosystems. But gosh, I mean, this thing, I mean, look at it. It's just so unique and wonderful. It blooms around early June, sometimes into July. But wonderful little, just forms clumps and should be a great plant. And Convolvulus sericatus. So this one is related to morning glories, but I mean, look at that silvery foliage. That's just something that is absolutely wonderful, and that should be a great garden plant as well. Don't know why anyone doesn't grow that plant, but oh gosh.
Would it be as aggressive as other morning glories?
No, it should. I've noticed it's not as aggressive. It's not as fast growing. It definitely doesn't seed around as much. I rarely see it set seed. So I don't think it.
Would that be an artifact of conditions as opposed to just innate?
I would think it. I don't know. I mean, gotta grow it to find out. That's all.
What color are the flowers?
Generally white. Yeah, white and open in the morning. So Crataegus. Not many people think of Crataegus as being a nice looking plant, but they can be. This is Crataegus lancei, which an absolutely wonderful plant. I mean, look at that arching form. I mean, you know, you can't get that from much else in the garden. Absolutely wonderful. And Echinacea laevigata. So Echinacea laevigata, that is a plant that is pretty restricted in its range. You know, we have some here up in Butner and a few other places, but gosh, I mean, I think it's on the federal list. Whether it's federally threatened or endangered, I couldn't tell you, but it's threatened now. Okay. So yeah, it's federally threatened, but I mean, just a wonderful plant. I like its open, airy texture more than Echinacea purpurea and a lot of the more compact types. But there it is again, getting pollinated. Wonderful plant, early July bloomer. And this is an interesting plant, Elytris farinosa. So this is from one of my favorite families, Narthiaceae, which I don't know if anyone's grown anything or heard of Narthiaceae, but it's a really obscure family, but it has some really interesting plants in it, like Narthecium americanum and a few other things. But this plant is wonderful. It blooms around Memorial Day. It's got this nice white flower spike that comes up. The foliage is just this tiny little basal rosette, but I mean, you could stick it into bogs, stick it into dry spot, and it does well anywhere. So that's just a fabulous, fabulous plants. And Clystesiopsis bifaria. So this is a orchid actually, and I mean, look at that. That's just, I mean, this blooms same time as the Elytris around Memorial Day, and absolutely, I mean, the intricacy on that. I have a better picture, right? Yeah, I mean, it's just, wow, that's really stunning. And Marshallia. Marshalias are another one of my favorites. So the Marshallia we tend to get up in the Piedmont and the Southern Blue Ridge Escarpment is Marshallia obovata, variety obovata. And these plants just form tight little cespitous clumps, and they bloom around, mid-April into May. Absolutely wonderful white little puff-like flowers, and the common name for these are Barbara's buttons, but no one knows who Barbara is. So if anyone knows who Barbara is, I want to know who Barbara is too. Rudbeckia heliopsidis. So you know, a lot of people grow all sorts of Rudbeckia, but no one grows Rudbeckia heliopsidis, and this is a really, really restricted plant. I mean, 1 to 2 counties in South Carolina, find it Georgia, Alabama a little bit. But it's just a wonderful plant, only around, I'd say, 2 to 3 foot tall, and it blooms, oh gosh, just wonderful how vibrant they are, and that's definitely one that should be grown a lot more. And Lysimachia fraseri, so that's also another pretty restricted plant, wonderful plant, gets around 3 to 4 foot tall. One of the tallest Lysimachias that there is, and it does not run around too much. I mean, seemingly so far it's just been a great garden plant, and I think it's, I mean, look at the flowers on that. It's just, you don't see that in any Lysimachia. And Baptisia albescens. So Baptisia albescens is an absolutely great plant architecturally, more so than the flowers. You can see in this picture they kind of form this little skirt almost. So a lot of Baptisias, they have foliage down to the ground, but these guys, they get foliage around a foot and a half up. So because of that, you're able to kind of vine more things through them, and I really think it's a lot nicer to have baptisia you can plant things under than just having a big mound of green foliage. So that's just one of my favorite baptisias from the region. And that's it. So, thank you guys. Oh, yes, I'll repeat the question for the Zoom. He had asked, is it okay to do a field trip, and how it is for people 3 to 4 times my age. So yeah, no, I'm definitely open to it. Just let me know what you want to see and when, and make that happen. And we'll make sure it's easy for everyone too. Have no accessibility issues, and yes. So the question was, when is the best time to find the most diversity on a field trip? So I would say probably spring. I know a lot of people probably want to see the Trilliums, which the best time for that is kind of when the sessles and the pediculates overlap. So first to second week of April, because then a lot of things are leafing out, coming into flower. I would say that's a really good time. And also the outcrops are plenty of moisture generally during that time, so they're looking good. But fall is also wonderful as well. I mean, there's a lot of fall blooming stuff that you can't see any other time of year. I mean, I would say just don't come in the dead of winter, but even then there's some really great stuff to see. So I would say any time of year, it just depends on what you want to see. So the question was, where is all this? So a lot of it, yeah, no, I would say a lot of great spots to see some of these plants are the South Carolina Heritage Preserves. So they have a program where a lot of land has been acquired with really special plants, special ecosystems, and they're now open to the public where you can go see all this stuff. So the South Carolina Heritage Preserve System, they have whole lists online of all their preserves and what's there. So that's really helpful. And that's one of the best ways to get to see all this stuff if you don't know where to find it. So the question was, up here in North Carolina, a lot of the heritage preserves are open only by people who lead them. I would say, so it depends who owns them. A lot of the Nature Conservancy properties, which are a lot of the ones up here, those tend to be by field trip only. You have to have someone guide you in, and a lot of the more sensitive sites. But all the South Carolina Heritage Preserves are open to the public, and public traffic is welcome. So the question was, what is cespitose? So cespitose is just clump forming. That's it. Yeah, really dense clump forming. So I mean, you'll see a lot of plants have the specific epithet cespitosa. Like there's Marshallia cespitosa, which just means Marshallia that's clump forming. So yeah, no. If there are any other terms that I used, please do pick my brain about it. I'm not the best at sometimes explaining that, but. So the question was, what is the altitude of a lot of these plants? So, I mean, generally the Blue Ridge Escarpment goes, so Caesar's Head, which is, kind of the top, one of the higher peaks in South Carolina, that's around 3,000 feet. And then Caesar's Head drops down to around 800 feet, which is generally what most of the Piedmont is at in the upstate of South Carolina. So, a lot of the lower stuff, the lower elevation granitic outcrops, that's around 1,100, 1,200, 1,300 feet. And then as you get higher, 2,000, 3,000 feet. And then, true Piedmont stuff is around 800, 900, down to 700, and goes all the way down to the coast. So the question was, how many of these are available to gardeners? Not enough. That's definitely the good answer. Not many. I mean, that's why I showed them, so people could know about them and hopefully find them somewhere. So it's a work in progress to get plants out, but it's slow. But eventually, hopefully, we'll get somewhere. So. Yeah. So the question was the diversity of pollinators in these environments. So yeah, I mean, the pollinator diversity is great. I mean, you can go out any time of year and find some sort of different pollinator. Things like the Asarum, the wild gingers, those are actually pollinated by roly-polies. I mean, well, do you guys call them roly-polies here? Yeah. You do? Okay, yes. So those are roly-poly and beetle pollinated, but there are things like the Sericicarpus, which are pollinated by more winged bugs. And I mean, Trilliums, so the Cuneatum complex, turns out that the ones that have the really long petals and that I showed in the presentation, those actually have their own specific pollinator compared to the ones that you find in the Piedmont of North Carolina that have that juicy fruit. So they have two different pollinators. So a lot of times plants have a specialist pollinator, And that can be a really, really good deciding factor on if it's a new species or not. So yeah, pollinator diversity is pretty great. All right.
Well, you stay up there. Let's
Yeah, do you wanna do that?
Another hand.